Thank you. So, do I have to click something to start? Yes. So, today I'm going to talk about Web3 and about identity and how you get back control of your data. So let's start a little bit with what is actually Web3, because in the last couple of months, I talk to managers and they sometimes say, yeah, that's NFTs, isn't it? And that was actually not what we thought. Because Web3 is something which is a brainchild of very intelligent people, not me, which was born in 2016, something around. And it actually wanted to solve a problem. So when we look at the Web 1, that was the non-interactive version, that actually emerged something in like 1973, and it went until 2004 or so. And it was based on things like IP and TCP, UDP, SMTP, HTTP, things that you use every day. And the interesting thing about those things that you use every day is that they're completely free, right? You never paid for them. Maybe your parents paid for them with their tax money because it was made by universities and military, but you don't pay. So this was completely free, and this was actually the vision of a very open system where everyone could build their applications on top of it and get rich with their applications. But then in 2004 something, and in the years after that, something interesting happened, and nobody thought of that. And when I say nobody, I actually mean nobody. None of the 8 billion people actually thought of that. Actually, but it was pretty clear in hindsight that it would happen. And what happened was so-called shelling points. So for those of you who are not in game theory, a shelling point is basically when you and me, we decide that we have to meet tomorrow in Paris at 4 p.m. and then your phone rings, and unfortunately you have to go away, and we can't really define where exactly in Paris we meet. Then we both fly to Paris, and we have the task that we have to be at the place at 4 o'clock where it is most probable that the other guy is also. So where would you be? In Paris, but where? Where would you meet me tomorrow at 4?
I think in the Louvre.
In the Louvre, yeah. 90% of the people say either Louvre or Eiffel Tower. So these are shelling points, right? So when you don't know where to go, but you most probably go there, then it's called a shelling point. This is nice with landmarks, but it's not nice in economy. When you search something on the internet, maybe the group here would say, of course, DuckDuckGo, but 99% of the people out there would say Google. And then Google becomes a shelling point. And when a company, a commercial company, becomes a shelling point, then we actually have a problem. Because then they are too important. They cannot fail, and they cannot be replaced. Or they can only be replaced by another shelling point, which doesn't make it better. And this happened for cloud computing, because you normally go to Amazon Web Services. Same for computation, Amazon Web Services. It happened for e-commerce a great deal. People go to eBay, Amazon, and so on. It is true for payment. You probably use PayPal or something. It is true for online communities. There's things like Facebook, you may have heard about. Then it's true for search. We talked about search. True for storage. And maybe also for minor things like transportation. You just use Uber. So we have many of these shelling points in there. And those companies are really complicated to deal with. And in 2016, a couple of hundred people sat together and said, okay, we have to change that. And you can't change shelling points. So what do you have to think? You have to do something to the protocol level, which is down there, which is still IP, TCP, UDP, SMTP, and HTTP, and nobody paid for it, also not Google. So what can we do? We have to take the fundamental things that everyone needs, like storage, like identity, like ownership, things which are like payment, things which are necessary for a flourishing internet, and we have to put them on protocol level. This is what the idea of Web3 is about. And this is what a lot of people, I think in the meantime it's thousands of people, are working on since 2016, and this is where we see the first results now since last year basically. And this is this layer. So we put the computation, we put the identity, the ownership, the payment, and the storage, and maybe some more things on a protocol level. And this protocol level is then owned by everyone again. So it is free, everyone can use it without paying to anyone. Storage is finished. You might have heard about IPFS, it's there. Payment, I think, is there since all the cryptocurrencies are there. Ownership is basically represented by the NFT stuff. Identity is what I represent here, KILT protocol. And computation is still underway. But what we can say today is that the infrastructure is now there. So this Web3 thing, even though some people think it's just NFTs, it is working, and the infrastructure can be used by anyone. It is free to use, and it's probably going to happen. It's not saying that there's no application layer anymore. You see the mine? Okay. The application layer will still exist. It's just an additional layer which is going to happen. So smaller applications can now be built using these things, making it a free internet again. And this is actually pretty good news. This Web3 repairs in this way the fundamental mistakes that we have made in the Web2. It adds common good functionality, like identity and so on, to the protocol layer, and it gives people back the control over their basic data and their basic applications. And builders, like you guys, can now start creating software applications on a level playing field. You don't have to use Google, you don't have to use Facebook for logging into something. You can now do this with free software which is not owned by a company. And this adds enormous value to an economy, I think. Another thing about Web3, and this is why it's so important, as it is now here, there will be no return. So when you are in the ad business or in the ad filtering business, it is now time to think about how your strategy for Web3 is going to be, because this thing is coming and it's not going to be rolled back. So in a couple of years, it's going to be important. It's now time to look at your business model and find your business model inside the Web3. I can't tell you what it is. You have to find it for yourself. But it is a fundamental change that is going to come up. It's not a revolution. It's not like tomorrow it's there. It is gradual. But as the infrastructure is now proven working, you will have to adopt to it in the next couple of years. I would say my personal prediction is in 2030, we are going to see more Web3 than Web2. Web2 is not going to go away at all, just as Web1 never went away. There's still Web1. A news site is Web1, it's not interactive, right? So Web1 will always be there, Web2 will always be there, but Web3 is coming on top of it. And I think the best chances to actually do cool things and earn a lot of money are probably in Web3 in the future. So let's now talk about identity. So first of all, what is identity? Identity always starts with an identifier. And there's a difference between identity and identifier. So here's a picture of my face. My face is obviously something that identifies me. If you meet me tomorrow, maybe in Paris, you will see, oh, that was the guy with the identity. Then you will recognize me. So it identifies me. And as long as I don't have a twin brother, it identifies me even uniquely. Fingerprint is another thing. Signature is another thing. These are all identifiers. The special thing about identifiers is that they are not given to me by anyone. So no one gave me my face, no one gave me my signature, no company is behind my name or my fingerprint or whatever. So these things are naturally decentralized. Everyone has their own identifier and they control them. So I basically control who I show my face to, and I definitely control what I sign. So these things are decentralized and they are linked to a person, 100%, and not given out by anyone else. But this is not identity, this is just identifying. So how do you make identity? Identity needs a second thing, and this is what we call the credentials. credentials are issued by trusted entities. That can be, for example, a government, which issues passports, identity cards. That can be an airline, which issues miles and more cards. That can be a part of the government which issues driver's licenses, but it can also be a university which issues university degrees, or it could be the Decentralized Identity Foundation, DIF, which issues a membership credential. How nice. So these are all credentials. They are issued by public entities, and they are then linked to an identifier which I have. For example, my identity card there has a picture of my face. That's going to be important in the future. So they are made personalized by having identifiers of the person linked to the credential. So when I have these two things, I actually build my identity, because this slide basically says, this is a person who's from Germany, who can drive a car, who has a degree in computer science from the TU Berlin, and is also a frequent flyer with Lufthansa, and a member of the Decentralized Identity Foundation. Now it becomes an identity, right? It's not only an identifier, it becomes more. So we always need these two things. What are they good for, those identities? They're good for identity transactions. Let's play an identity transaction. So I want to buy a bottle of whiskey, and in most countries I have to be 18 years of age for that. So I go to this guy in the shop there. They obviously have whiskey. Say, what bottle of whiskey, please? And then he says, some ID, please. You have to prove that you're 18. Now I have the choice, and that's important. I have the choice that I cannot show any credentials and just walk out. Well, I won't get whiskey, but I can do that. And then I can also choose which credential I want to show. It is just necessary that it proves that I'm 18, right? So I could use my driver's license, I can use my identity card, maybe also my passport, student card, whatever. Interesting enough, these credentials, they are not on a server, right? They are in my personal wallet here. So I control if I show this credential, which credential I show and for what purpose and to whom. So I have the full control over my identity in the physical world. Okay, then I show this thing, and then the first thing that he does is that, does the subject equal the credential? So is my face actually the face which is there on the picture, which means that I can actually also throw away my passport, and you can't pick it up and buy a bottle of whiskey because you have a completely different hairdo. So they wouldn't mix us up. So it's personalized by the identifier. Pretty cool. Next thing that he does is, well, is this a valid credential? So first thing he checks, he reads on the top and sees Federal Republic of Germany and says, okay, heard about that, maybe I trust them. So that can be a trusted entity. Then he checks if the credential is actually not a fake, right? Maybe shaking it a little bit. And then he checks if it is valid, it has an expiration date on it. And if it's valid, then he can go and say, okay, let's look at the date of birth, and then he makes some small calculation, and then he says, this guy is definitely over 18. And then he can hand me the bottle of whiskey. So this is how it works in the physical world, and this is a fantastic process that we had there. Because this decentralized identity, and we have decentralized identity, is nothing that's totally new, right? We use it for like 1,000 years. This decentralized identity separates the issuing of the credential from the showing of the credential. This is what we call asymmetric trust, because there's no connection between the issuer and the verifier. The Federal Republic of Germany and the guy who sells me the whiskey don't know each other. This can be in Amsterdam, this whiskey shop, right? It still works. My German identity works on an international level, also in Amsterdam, and the guy in Amsterdam who sells me whiskey didn't register with the Federal Republic of Germany as a whiskey seller or something, right? Still, he can use this for the transaction. And it makes high scalability, because the server of the Federal Republic of Germany is not going to go down even if millions of people buy whiskey at the same time, because they're just not part of the transaction. And having them not part of the identity transaction also gives a lot of privacy to me because they will never find out that I bought a bottle of whiskey, which is very good for me, I think. So this is what we have in the physical world. And I think this is a fantastic process. So when we now look at the digital world, how does it look? Your digital identity is basically your Google account or your Facebook account. That's not so great because the identifier is actually not made by you, it is made by them. So they control your identifier. And they can delete your identifier if they want. So then you lose your identity. You cannot do anything about it. So not really fair. Looking at credentials. In Facebook, you have lots of credentials. Everything that you do produces credentials. Those credentials are not stored in your wallet. They are all stored in the Facebook database. And when you then want to log into, let's say, WhatsApp, WhatsApp talks with Facebook about you without you even being involved in that. So they share your credentials with other services. So every time you click this log in with Facebook button, just think what just happens. It's really not fair. So this is something where we need change. So this is a fundamental flaw of the Web 2, and it goes into so many things, because when you want to talk about ownership, then you also have to talk about identity, because things are owned by identities, right? So it's really hard if there's a company which owns the identity. So this shouldn't be the case. So we somehow have to take this process which we had in the physical world and transport it somehow in the digital world, which is complicated, but it has to be done. And this is exactly what KILT protocol did in the last couple of years. The first thing that we did, maybe the most important thing, is that we actually worked together with the W3C and the DIF on DIDs. DID stands for Decentralized Identifier. This is a standard now. Despite Facebook, they tried to actually at least they slowed it down for a year, but they couldn't avoid it. So it's now a standard by the W3C. It defines how a decentralized identifier actually looks and how it is transported and how it is created. This is a very important thing, and so this was 5 years of work, not only by us. There were 300 companies involved, including Microsoft and IBM, so basically everyone, just not Facebook. And also Google wasn't very much pro in the beginning, but then in the end they supported it. So it's important to have the standard, because if everyone tries to build their own standard for DIDs or for decentralized identifiers, then we will not succeed. It has to be clear how these things look. So you first have to define how the plastic card actually looks, right? Otherwise it won't work. So this is now defined, and what we did is we implemented the standard. So we also implemented the so-called verifiable, revocable, and anonymous credentials, which trusted entities can issue to users. Users can store them in their identity wallet on their computer and then can show them at any time they want. So what do? Practically, first you make your DID. How do you do it? Definitely not by asking someone for it. You get yourself a little piece of software. You generate it on your own computer, because it should be like your fingerprint, right? You generate it yourself. Then you have your DID. Then you go to trusted entities and ask for credentials. If you deserve them, you will get them. And then you take those credentials and you store them in your digital wallet on your computer. And then if you want to buy a bottle of whiskey in an online shop, you can send a credential which proves that you're 18 to the shop, and then they can sell you the whiskey online. This is how digital identity basically works. It not only works, just as a side note, for persons, it also works for machines. We proved that in a pilot project with the German Energy Association, where German smart meters now get equipped with the IDs and also credentials. It can also be they can also be used to identify services or digital assets, for example, NFTs, and there you have the connection between the ownership and the identity in the Web3. So these things are all falling together now, right? So I think I said all this already. So how does a DID look? Maybe quite interesting. Pretty crazy. It says it starts with DID, then with a method. There's not only KILT. It's open source, of course, and it's an international standard. I think there's 100 implementations of it already, so you can use ORS or any other. And then comes a long string. These strings can, of course, be associated in a one-to-one connection on a blockchain with a human-readable name. They're decentralized. And we use a blockchain or we build a blockchain actually. So we have built a level 1 blockchain. So this is the same level where you find Ethereum and Bitcoin, which manages the DIDs in a totally decentralized way and does not store, for example, your credentials because they are on your computer, but stores the validity of the credential, because the validity of the credential is something that you don't want to have stored in a central service again, because that could become really dangerous. So this is why we chose to use blockchain technology to implement this. And yeah, that's actually, when I look at the clock and when I look at the faces, I think there's 2 or 3 questions. Maybe I should stop talking and allow some questions. Here we go. Throw the cube.
Yeah, so I think you already heard maybe that the European Union are doing a similar thing. They want to implement like a digital wallet where they hope to achieve the same thing as the KILT protocol. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's fantastic. So the main difference is actually that the European Union always thinks that they produce the identifier. And that's not good. We see a lot of governments, actually, not only the European Union, Switzerland have the same issue currently. So please stand up against these things. They are absolutely dangerous, because our democratic governments, which are all elected, they say, it's not bad if we hold your identifier, because we are nice. Of course they are nice. But there's one thing about data and governments and democracy that you always have to have in mind. Data does not go away. Governments do. So if you give your data or your identity, the key to your identity is basically your identifier, right? Your face, your fingerprint, your signature. If you give this away to the government, that might be fine today. But is it fine in 20 years? We don't know, because there will be other governments, and the government today cannot take responsibility for the future. Democracy is a form of governance which can self-destruct. I'm from Germany, we know that. 90 years ago, we had a totally democratic election, and what came out was Hitler. If that happens again, and no one knows if it happens again, so this is too dangerous, because the likelihood of something bad happening is so high that we actually cannot give our identifiers to governments. They have to be decentralized. So these things, which are currently projects, pilot projects or so, in Europe and also in other countries, are extremely dangerous. And there's countries where I would expect this, but actually not in Western democracies.
What, in your opinion, should happen in order for decentralized identifiers to be more common in the market, and basically to become like more of an industry standard on how you provide identification?
Yeah, so first of all, they are an industry standard. W3C is an industry thing, yeah. Right? So
I mean industry standard, not in the sense of being a standard in
but
industry,
being
used. Like really common.
Yeah. Of course, this is an adoption thing, right? You can't expect it to be adopted yet because it was just standardized like three months ago. So, but what we see right now, because we are speaking here and there, is that more and more companies, and I'm also talking big companies, so really, really big companies are understanding that, and they're moving in that direction, and they are adopting it. And so this is going to go faster than you think probably. So digital identifiers, because we saw that in the morning, right? 30% of the people actually say they don't want to give away their data at all. So you already have 30% of the population behind that. And the cool thing with the Web3 applications, which come out now, so I don't have 2 hours, but I would like to show you some applications. They are not worse than the Web2 applications. So usability is not the killer anymore. So no problem, I think.
Hi, could you please explain what's the business side of this for KILT? So how do you plan to earn as a company?
Oh, that's a complicated question. So first of all, there is a blockchain, and this blockchain is a decentralized network. It has its own business case. So, is this what you're asking for, or for the company which developed this blockchain?
Well, specifically for KILT.
KILT, yeah, because that's more interesting. So, it's a token-based model. So KILT coins are limited. There's not unlimited amount of them. They have an inflation, but a very low inflation. And when you produce a DID, you lock KILT coins. Currently, it's 2 KILT coins. You lock them on your account. That means you don't pay. You just pay a deposit. The deposit is still in your account. If you give up the DID, then you get the 2 KILT coins back automatically. Yeah? That's what the blockchain does. I have no influence in that. This is what happens. But as people will most probably make DIDs and not give up DIDs too often, then the KILT coin as such becomes more scarce, faster than the inflation runs, because we have a very low inflation. And this motivates the people who run the network, we call them collators, to run the network. That's the business model of the blockchain. Because the collators are rewarded with the inflation. So for blockchain people, that was very understandable. I'm sorry.
Hello, my name is Frank. I already decided in 2011 to not use Facebook and all these companies anymore. So now I'm listening to your story and I think, where are my credentials? Do I have some already on the internet? Do I create new ones? How does that work for me? Like, I have no digital footprint, almost, at all.
Good for you.
Yes, but do I have to go again on Instagram to create credentials? Or should I rely on the government that they finally will go on a blockchain?
No, you don't have to. No. So that depends on what credentials you need, right? So if you need a credential that...
Let's say I want to rent an apartment.
Yeah.
And they want to see if I can come up with the money. Or I want to rent a car.
Yeah.
I go to Hertz Rent a Car. So they want to check my driver's license. For this, the government needs to put something on the blockchain so they can verify that my driver's license is still valid.
Not necessarily. If you, for example, have, so I can't say names yet because I'm not allowed, but so there will be some huge companies which are in the business of credentialing things. Today they do that on paper. Some of those companies will offer services like credentialing your government credentials. So they take, so basically, let's call that KYC, what you need for the for your apartment, right? You basically need to say, yeah, I'm Dutch and I'm that old and I live here and I'm whatever. So this is a KYC credential, what you need. So there will be, I think in December, January, there will be services out there where you pay, I don't know, 20 euros or something, and you get a digital KILT-based credential in your personal wallet that this big company, which has a lot of trust, and your new landlord will accept that, credential that you are actually this person. And then you can send this credential over to this guy, and then he can give you the apartment.
Like a sort of, is it Graydon? Graydon?
Graydon?
Yeah, Graydon is a Web2 company, and I think...
I can't say names, I'm sorry. No. But it's not Graydon because I never heard that.
You mean there is a layer between the government and the user, then?
Yeah, and I can also credential that to you, but your landlord wouldn't believe me, right? But they will believe a huge company because they do those stamps for bigger things than your company normally. So they are used for buying and selling companies and stuff like that. So they normally do the KYCs for that. And so they will be accepted by the landlords.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know one question in particular that is relevant to ad tech, perhaps, is the concept of fraud. So I know that a lot of ad companies want to make sure that their ads are being viewed by a real person and not somebody who is pretending to be a real person hundreds of thousands of times.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you have a perspective on how, for example, these identity providers will verify that you are actually a unique person and not going to create multiple identities and claim that they're different, I guess.
I think they could do that, but probably this will not hit like everyone on the first day. So if we get, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 or 10 million in the first 2 years credentials in this, then they have made a great business. But I think there should be something else for the internet, for being a person. So there's a small application that connected company of us wrote. It's called Social KYC. If you want to look at that, maybe socialkyc.io. You can look at that. This is where you can get your social media things credentialed. So they test basically if this is really your Twitter account and this is really your TikTok account or whatever. And then you can have a lot of credentials and then you can send them with something. But maybe there's also business models. I'm basically here to tell you there's a lot of business models out there. Just go get them. There's so much to do.
So I have just a question, if you could maybe go back 2 slides. It was when you were talking about digital identities or decentralized identities.
Doesn't work.
Okay, doesn't matter. For basically beyond just people, for like kind of machines and services. And I think I'm starting to really understand Web3 and this kind of paradigm shift on another level. But I'm still not really grasping the concept of a service having a decentralized identity. And I was wondering if you could maybe just expand on that.
Yeah, the following 10 slides are exactly about that. Okay. And this is why, for time reasons, I couldn't go into that. So just 10 words about that. So the problem with VIDs is that it's an active thing, right? So you need a wallet, and the wallet needs to be able to sign something, right? This is the signature part. So a table or a service cannot necessarily sign something, especially an NFT can't. So what can you do with that? What you can do is that you find, at least for digital things which have a unique occurrence on a blockchain, for example, like an NFT, but that could also be a service. These services can have a unique identifier, so you have now a unique identifier. We call that asset DIDs, also standardized by the W3C already. So the asset DIDs are there. So it's DIDs, KILT, and then still this thing. It defines exactly this digital object, but only this one. So it's passive. So it's just findable. You can find it again. You can locate it. But the cool thing, what you can do, is you can still issue credentials to these things. Those credentials then are do not need to be GDPR compliant because they're not about persons. So what we can do in this case is we can publish the credentials on the blockchain, and they will always be linked to this digital object. Which means that even if the ownership of the object changes, like you selling your NFT, then still all the credentials which were attached to this thing, they migrate with that. This is how it works. Actually, that was much faster than the 5 slides. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Am I on time? Yes. But thank you. There seems to be a lot of interest in this topic, and thank you for your last question. So we got a little bit of a elevator summary of what we were missing out on the final slides. But you can still talk to Ingo in the upcoming break, which we'll have in half an hour. You're still around, so just hit him up there, and yeah, maybe if you have a chat question from home, put it into Slack. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There was so much interest in your topic.